My son-in-law's family pushed my daughter into the icy lake for fun. She hit her head and was about to drown. I screamed for help, but they only laughed. When the ambulance arrived, I called my brother and said, "Do what you have to do." Was I wrong to unleash everything I had on them, to destroy their perfect little world after what they did to my little girl? Tell me if you would have shown them mercy, because I didn't, and I regret absolutely nothing. I'll get to what exactly I told my brother and what followed, the thing that shattered their smug existence forever. But first, you have to understand exactly what kind of people I was dealing with and how this whole toxic relationship began. It all started so innocently, as these nightmares often do. My daughter, Clara, was a bright light in my life, my only child, and she had fallen head over heels for a man named Ethan. Now, Ethan himself seemed decent enough on the surface. A little quiet, a little too subservient to his parents, but polite and stable. He came from a family of old money, the kind of wealth that doesn't need to be flashy, the kind that permeates everything with an air of superiority and entitlement. His parents, Robert and Eleanor, were the matriarch and patriarch of this gilded cage, and from the moment I met them, I felt an icy shiver run down my spine. They didn't dislike me, they just didn't see me. They saw Clara as a charming accessory for their son, someone who, while not quite their social equal, was good enough to bring into the family, provided she knew her place. The problem was, Clara didn't know her place, at least not the one they had mentally assigned her. She was a fiery, independent woman with a booming career in finance that actually outpaced Ethan's, a fact they studiously ignored. They would constantly refer to her as Ethan's little homemaker, or the girl with the cute job, making sure to diminish her accomplishments at every turn. I bit my tongue for Clara's sake, always telling myself that their snobbishness was a burden she had to deal with, not me. Their wedding was a massive, over-the-top affair, naturally, entirely planned and paid for by Robert and Eleanor, which meant every single detail was a testament to their own impeccable taste and wealth, not a reflection of Clara and Ethan's wishes. Clara wanted a small, intimate ceremony by the ocean. She got a 400-person gala in a historic mansion with enough crystal to blind a small nation. She cried to me the night before, feeling like a puppet in her own marriage ceremony, and I remember holding her, telling her it was just one day, one hurdle, and the important thing was the life she was building with Ethan. Oh, how wrong I was to think the wedding was the hurdle. It was merely the starting line. The first year of marriage was a constant battle of subtle psychological warfare waged by Robert and Eleanor. They had bought the young couple a beautiful but frankly enormous house, only a 5-minute drive from their own palatial estate. This proximity, they insisted, was for the sake of family togetherness, but in reality, it was a way for Eleanor to drop by unannounced several times a week to critique Clara's decorating, her cooking, and even her choice of car. Ethan, God bless him, was useless. He would stand by, shuffling his feet, offering a weak, "Mom, please," which only encouraged Eleanor to double down on her passive, aggressive critiques. Their dynamic was one of total control. They were financially generous to the extreme, but every penny came with 1,000 strings attached, all wrapped around Clara's neck. There were other members of this charming clan, too. Ethan had a sister, Madison, and a brother, Jason. Madison was a mirror image of her mother, cold, judgmental, and utterly convinced of her own superiority. She was a professional socialite, her life revolving around charity galas and designer labels, and she saw Clara as a rival for her mother's attention, a competition she had no intention of losing. Jason was the quiet brute, a man whose favorite pastime seemed to be mocking people less refined than himself. His humor was cruel and cutting, always masked with a sly, condescending smile. They all seemed to draw strength from belittling Clara. I saw my daughter, this vibrant, self-assured woman, slowly having her light dimmed by this constant barrage of micro-aggressions and outright disdain. When I tried to intervene, gently at first, Eleanor would just smile that tight, plastic smile and say, "Oh, my name, you simply misunderstand. We're just being family. We tell each other the truth." Their truth, of course, was always designed to chip away at Clara's self-esteem. The final, catastrophic event took place during their annual winter family retreat at a sprawling lodge they owned deep in the Adirondacks. It was a mandatory event, a grueling 4-day affair of forced camaraderie, pretentious parlor games, and naturally copious amounts of expensive wine. Clara hated it, but Ethan insisted they had to go to keep the peace, and more importantly, to keep the massive trust fund payments flowing. I had spoken to Clara the day before they left, and she sounded resigned, like a soldier heading back to a pointless war. "Just keep your head down, sweetheart," I advised her. 4 days, and you'll be home. If only I had known that the danger wasn't merely psychological. The lodge was situated right next to a huge, beautiful, but very cold lake. The weather had been bitterly cold for weeks, and the lake was completely frozen over, a thick sheet of gray-white ice stretching out to the distant tree line. The day of the incident was the last day of the retreat. I was home, tending to my garden, when my phone rang. It was a FaceTime call from Clara, which was odd because she usually just texts. I answered, and what I saw will be burned into my mind until my last breath. The screen was shaky, showing a chaotic scene. I could hear shouting, but at first I couldn't make out the words. Then I saw Clara. She was not standing. She was in the water, not on the ice, but in the water. The ice sheet had clearly broken, and she was thrashing, her face a mask of terror, the freezing water a dark, shocking contrast to her pale skin. The hole in the ice wasn't far from the shore, maybe 30 feet, but it might as well have been a mile. I could hear Robert's booming laughter first, then Madison's high-pitched cackle. My blood turned to ice. "What is happening, Clara? Get out." I screamed into the phone, but she was too panicked to hear me. Then the camera stabilized, and I saw Jason, the brute, standing near the edge of the broken ice with a coiled rope in his hand, looking down at my daughter fighting for her life. He wasn't throwing it, he was holding it, and he was smiling. "Come on, Clara, don't be such a drama queen. It's just a little dip," he shouted, and the family roared with laughter. They were enjoying it. They had pushed her. The story unfolded in fragmented, horrifying glimpses. It turned out they were playing some kind of ridiculous dare game. Jason had dared Clara to go stand close to a spot on the ice he knew was thin, a spot near an underwater spring they often used for ice fishing. When she hesitated, Eleanor, of all people, had walked up behind her and given her a sharp two-handed shove. It wasn't just a playful push. It was a malicious act of humiliation. They fully expected her to splash a little, get wet, and crawl back out, a thoroughly shamed and chilled spectacle for their amusement. But Clara hadn't just gone in. As she fell, she must have twisted, and her head struck the sharp, jagged edge of the broken ice. I saw the blood, a dark, sickening stain spreading on the white surface. Her movements became sluggish, frantic, and then terrifyingly slow. She was in shock from the cold, and the head injury was clearly disorienting her. She started to slip under. I screamed until my throat was raw, a primal sound of a mother witnessing her child drown through a phone screen. I remember shouting her name over and over, uselessly. It was Ethan, surprisingly, who finally broke the spell of their cruel amusement. I saw him tackle Jason, wrestling the rope away, and then he was on his stomach, cautiously inching toward the hole. By the time he managed to pull her limp, heavy body onto the solid ice, too much time had passed. She was unconscious, her lips blue, her breath shallow. The phone dropped onto the ice, and all I could hear was the frantic chaos of people finally realizing they had pushed their joke too far. Someone was screaming for a coat, someone else was saying, "She's not breathing right," and Robert, his voice suddenly stripped of all its arrogance, was shouting, "Call 911. Call them now." It was in that moment, in the cacophony of their terror, that I got my clarity. They weren't bad people in the dramatic villain sense. They were far worse. They were merely thoughtless, spoiled, and entitled people who genuinely believed the rules of the universe did not apply to them, and that their fun was more important than a human life. Their laughter had been the most corrosive, damning sound I had ever heard. I hung up the FaceTime call, the image of my daughter's face, bruised and cold, still vibrating behind my eyes, and immediately called my brother, James. James isn't just my brother. He's my rock, and more relevantly, he's a force of nature in his field. James is a top-tier corporate litigation specialist, and I mean top-tier. He doesn't take cases, he takes wars. He has a network that reaches into every corner of law, finance, and media. He's the kind of man you want on your side when you need to dismantle a reputation and a financial empire brick by painful brick. When I finally got through to him, I was no longer screaming. My voice was low, flat, and colder than the ice that had nearly claimed my daughter. I briefly, clinically, told him what had happened: the laughter, the head injury, the near drowning, the family's total disregard. And then, as I saw the paramedics rushing across the screen of my now ringing, "Again phone, it was Ethan," I said those words, "Do what you have to do." He didn't ask what I meant. He just said, "Consider it done. I'm on a flight in 2 hours. I'll meet you at the hospital." That was all I needed. The hospital waiting room was a blur of fluorescent lights and hushed anxiety. When I finally got there, having driven like a maniac through 3 states, I found Ethan looking wrecked, Robert and Eleanor looking pale and horrified, and Madison and Jason huddled in a corner. Whispering nervously, they tried to approach me to offer their platitudes, their excuses. It was just a joke, a terrible accident, my name. Eleanor began, tears pooling in her carefully made-up eyes. "We didn't mean any harm." Robert tried to put a hand on my shoulder, but I simply looked at him, and he dropped his hand as if he'd touched a live wire. "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. I just said the only reason my daughter is fighting for her life right now is because you found her suffering funny. You laughed. You stood there and laughed while she drowned. Do not speak to me again. Do not look at me again. Get out of this hospital." Ethan stayed, thank God, but the 3 of them scurried away, realizing in that moment that their wealth offered no immunity from my judgment. Clara was in a medically induced coma, hypothermia, cerebral edema from the concussion, and secondary drowning complications. The doctor painted a grim, uncertain picture of her recovery. The following days were the darkest of my life, spent sitting by her bedside, holding her cool hand, praying for a flicker of recognition. And while I prayed, James was moving. He had taken my instruction, "Do what you have to do," as a blank check to unleash total, scorched-earth warfare. Robert and Eleanor's empire, I learned, was built on a web of complex trusts, limited partnerships, and a large, publicly traded company where Robert served as CEO. It was all very secure, provided no one looked too closely. James, through his network, found the one thing they had carelessly overlooked: a crucial, years-old real estate transaction that was technically fraudulent and just barely within the statute of limitations. It involved the non-disclosure of a massive environmental hazard on a piece of land they had flipped, netting them a fortune. James didn't just find it. He immediately started working with a rival, deeply hostile law firm who had been circling the Robertsons for years, waiting for a weakness. He handed them the blueprint. So that's the situation I was in. My daughter was in a coma, her life hanging by a thread because her husband's family thought her near. Death experience was a hilarious practical joke. They were starting to panic, sending bouquets of ridiculously expensive flowers that I had the nurses throw in the trash, and leaving me long, tearful voicemails begging for forgiveness and promising to pay for every medical bill. Their attempts at reconciliation were pathetic. They were only scared of the consequences, not remorseful for the cruelty. I was holding a nuclear option in my hands, a way to dismantle their entire lives, ruin their reputations, and ensure they suffered a financial and social death that mirrored the tragedy they had inflicted on Clara. I had told James to do what he had to do, and he was ready to press the button. Before I tell you what happened next, the full, devastating execution of my revenge and the confrontation that followed, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have let James move forward? Would you have accepted their blood money and let them off with a warning? Or would you have demanded justice, the kind that costs everything? I truly need to know what you think. I stood at Clara's bedside, the phone call from James still ringing in my ears. He had laid out the whole plan. The legal case was solid. The fallout would be instant, public, and catastrophic. It wasn't just a lawsuit. It was the ruin of their family name, the collapse of Robert's company stock, and the almost certain dismantling of their entire financial security. He said he needed the final go-ahead. I looked at Clara. Her face was peaceful now, the worst swelling having gone down, but the stillness of the coma was terrifying. I remembered the sound of their laughter over the phone, the casual cruelty in Jason's voice, the entitled indifference of Elinor as she shoved my daughter into a freezing grave. That memory was a fire in my gut that burned away any hesitation. I picked up my phone and called James. "Go," I said, "every single detail. I want them to lose everything." The climax of this nightmare was not a dramatic courtroom scene or a screaming match. It was the slow, methodical, agonizing decay of their privileged world. The first sign was the news. A local investigative reporter, tipped off by James's associates, ran an anonymous story about an imminent environmental litigation disaster involving a prominent family and a controversial land deal. The next day, Robert's company stock plummeted by 25%. A week later, James's hired guns filed the official lawsuit, citing corporate fraud, environmental negligence, and a slew of other criminal and civil charges. The filing was public, sensational, and timed to cause maximum damage. The day the news broke nationally, Robert was forced to step down as CEO. The lawsuits started piling up shareholders, former employees, and environmental groups, all drawn in by James's opening salvo. Robert and Elinor, who had once lived in a world where money smoothed over every problem, were now staring down the barrel of financial, professional, and personal obliteration. I hadn't seen them since that day in the hospital, but they started showing up. First, it was a meek phone call from Elinor, begging me to call off my attack dog brother. She was hysterical, no longer the composed matriarch, but a terrified, entitled woman facing true consequences for the first time in her life. I didn't answer. Then they appeared at the hospital, trying to bully their way past security. They looked like ghosts. Robert's expensive suit was rumpled, his face haggard. Elinor's perfect hair was a mess. They cornered me in the hallway, outside Clara's room. Robert tried to play the strong man, his voice tight with forced authority. "This is insane, my name. This is madness. We'll lose everything. You're destroying your daughter's marriage. This is not what she would want." I finally spoke, and my voice was deadly calm. "You pushed my daughter into an icy lake and laughed while she drowned. You showed her no mercy. You treated her life as a punchline. You thought your money made you untouchable. Well, you're finding out now that it doesn't. You will lose everything you hold dear, Robert, not because of a joke, but because of your cruelty. And when you are a broken shell of a man, stripped of your wealth and your name, remember that I am the one who did this to you. And I did it because you laughed at my dying child." I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there, utterly defeated. The aftermath was long and emotionally exhausting. Clara slowly, agonizingly woke up from the coma. The recovery was tough. She had severe short-term memory loss and struggled with fine motor skills for months. She had to learn to walk and talk again almost from scratch. It was a trauma that would stay with her forever. But she was alive. Ethan was a complete mess. He was caught between his loyalty to his wife and his ingrained terror of his parents. He was the one who ended up telling Clara the full truth about what his family had done and the crushing consequences I had unleashed. Robert and Eleanor were pariahs. The environmental fines alone wiped out a significant portion of their liquid assets. The stock collapse destroyed the rest. The house, the lodge, the trusts all gone, slowly dismantled by the legal machine James had set in motion. They moved into a small, rented condo, stripped of their prestige and their comfort. Clara, when she was finally lucid, looked at me and asked the most crucial question. "Mom, why did you have to ruin them? Wasn't I enough?" It broke my heart, but it gave me a final chance to explain. I told her that my actions were not about revenge in the classic sense, but about setting a boundary with steel. I told her they had shown a fundamental lack of value for her life, and if they thought a near-death experience was funny, they would never, ever respect her or our family. They needed to learn that their actions had consequences, that even their wealth couldn't shield them from. It took a long time, but she eventually understood, and most importantly, she chose herself. She filed for divorce. Ethan, finally free of his parents' financial leash, was a rudderless ship, and the marriage, built on his family's approval and money, simply collapsed. Clara needed a partner, not another son for her mother to raise. She focused on her recovery, on rebuilding her life, and with my help and support, she did it. We moved her into a lovely apartment far away from their toxic shadow, and she started working part-time again, finding strength she didn't know she had. Robert and Eleanor tried one last time. They sent me a handwritten, tear-stained letter begging for a meeting, saying they were ruined and just needed a chance to rebuild. I burned the letter. I had given them their chance the moment their laughter echoed over the phone, and they failed that test of basic humanity. They lost everything, and they deserved to. My brother James simply sent me a 2-word text after the final settlement, justice served. This whole ordeal taught me that sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to become the monster you fear. I became cold, calculating, and ruthless, and in doing so, I saved my daughter's life, not just from the icy lake, but from a lifetime of psychological abuse. I am not haunted by what I did to them. I am only haunted by the sound of their laughter. If you made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. I hope you never have to face a choice like the one I did. But if you do, know that a mother's love is the fiercest weapon in the world. Like this video if you are on my side, and agree that there is no price tag on a human life. Subscribe to my channel for more deeply personal and shocking stories like this one. And make sure to ring that notification bell so you don't miss a thing. I want you to share your final thoughts on this whole mess, especially on Ethan's role and whether I went too far with the revenge, down in the comments section below. I'll see you all in the next story.